The Trump administration visa processing freeze that he has put on 75 countries, including half of the countries in Africa, is restricted to only immigrant visas, which means that it won't affect student visas and tourist visas, aka people coming to the US to attend the World Cup on paper. But here's the thing. In 2022, the US government itself came to the conclusion that whenever they try to implement any visa, policy targeted at only a small size of applicant, it ends up affecting everybody. For example, when the 2019 new visa rule Trump put in place, it ended up increasing the visa processing time for 4 weeks for everybody. And it also increased the number of visa denial for people who are not supposed to be affected by the policy. So yes, on paper, it won't affect student visas and tourist visas, but in practice, if history is to be believed, it will affect everybody. I'll explain what all of this mean for you on this channel. My name is Nenebi Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about geopolitics and trade from the perspective of an African. And so, if you are into intellectual conversations, subscribe to this channel. Now, let's start with this. In my earlier video I made about the visa processing freeze, I spoke in general terms because I was explaining that, yeah, there is a new policy the Trump administration has put in place, and then that policy came into place because of a rule that was implemented in November, and I explained why that rule was implemented in November. Because I like to make people understand this. If a government, any government in the world, implement a policy, it doesn't matter whether you like that government or not. It doesn't matter whether you agree with that policy or not. They have their reason for implementing that policy. So sometimes it's always good to understand where they are coming from. So even if you hate the policy, you can target your criticism on their reason, so you don't make emotional argument. I feel like we don't make any gains if we make our arguments emotional. That is why I like to focus on explaining things intellectually. So this is going to be another intellectual explanation on why I think that even though the policy is not targeted at non-immigrant visas, it will affect non-immigrant visas. So let's start with this. The World Cup would happen in the US in June. And so while the Trump administration is implementing new immigration rules, they are also mindful of the World Cup. So they implement the rules with the World Cup in mind. So for example, when they announced the freeze on visa processing in 2025, they said the rule will not affect people who will be coming to the US as World Cup players and officials. They were explicit about that even in 2025. That was even before every country had qualified for the World Cup. So they were mindful of it from now. So even with this, I am of the opinion that if the Trump administration wasn't mindful of the World Cup, this policy would have affected everybody, not just migrant visas. So I believe that the reason why non-migrant visas was left out of this new rule is because of the World Cup. So yes, while Trump is strict on immigration, he also wants to have a successful World Cup because the World Cup is a big deal for America. I know America doesn't play football and doesn't care about football, but the World Cup is important to America. And I'll explain why. The World Cup is the biggest global event. There is no event in the world bigger than the World Cup. The World Cup is bigger than the Olympics. I said it. So America wants to be associated with the World Cup because of the prestige it attached to the World Cup. That is why in 1994, they hosted the World Cup even though they didn't have a professional soccer league in America. And a lot of people don't know this, but the reason why America investigated FIFA and Sepp Blatter and the old FIFA regime was removed for corruption is because America didn't win the bid to host the World Cup in 2022. America was so pissed they didn't host the World Cup in 2022, they shut down the whole FIFA system. That is how much the World Cup means to America. And this happened under the first Trump administration. You understand? And Biden also continued it. It doesn't matter whether it's Democrats or Republicans. Americans like global, want to be ahead of the world, like to be the leader of the world. They are the leader of the world politically and to understand culturally. But in terms of sports, because football or soccer is the number one sport in the world, America is not the leader of the world in sports. And so the World Cup is a way of them trying to establish their dominance in the world of sports. That is why they are putting in place policies in a way that doesn't affect the World Cup. However, in spite of the fact that they are trying not to have their immigration policies affect the World Cup, it will still affect the World Cup. And I'll explain to you why. So in 2019, this new rule that the Trump administration has announced, the public charge rule, which I explained in my earlier video, they put it in place in 2019. And Biden removed it in 2022. And the reason the Biden administration gave for removing the rule is that, let me put it this way, time is a finite resource. We all have 24 hours in a day. And we all work 8 hours of the day. So the people who work in the America consulate around the world also work 8 hours a day. So if there is a rule for them to be strict on migrant visas and do quadruple checks on migrant visas, that means that 8 hours of their day will be devoted to making sure that they cross all their T's and dot all their I's. For example, if there are things that they don't make public, if they are supposed to ask themselves 8 questions before granting you the visa, the 2019 rule Trump put in place made it that instead of 8 questions, ask yourself 15 questions before granting the visa. So that means that instead of, if each question is 1 minute, now it's 15 minutes. So that increased the number of time they spend on migrant visas. And according to the Biden administration, that small increase of time increased each visa processing time by 2 to 3 weeks. So the migrant visas were taking a lot of time, which means that the time devoted to non-migrant visas was reduced. This according to their own findings, right? And so that contributed to non-migrant visas not getting enough attention. So some people who were non-migrant visa applicants were affected negatively. Let's say because they don't have time for your process, maybe instead of spending 5 minutes to look at your document, they spend 2 minutes. Because they have only 2 minutes to spend on your document, they will be looking out for, instead of more things, they'll be looking out for, he said he has a bank account with Efijasi Rural Bank. What is that bank? Denied. These are human beings. So it means that they were denying people visas for more frivolous reasons than they're supposed to. And because they have the discretion, the consular officer, the person who is denying you visa, he's doing his administrative duty. And anytime you are doing administrative duty, you have the discretion. So judges have discretion. So there are some things that will happen to you in relating to the government, and it's not even because you did something wrong. It's just an administrative rule. So because they have the discretion, if they deny you visa, there's nothing you can do about it. You understand? So the Biden administration realized that, people who are not supposed to be affected were affected by our rule. And that is why they changed the rule in 2022 to less restrictive forms. So now, instead of when Biden when Trump increased it to 15 questions, I was using as an example in 2019, the Biden administration reduced it to 8 questions again. So that was the rule from 2022 till November. The Trump administration changed it. So basically, the point I'm making is, on paper, yes, it won't affect tourist visas and student visas and other forms of non-immigrant visas. But the reality is, we are dealing with human beings. So if they are told to be strict, they are going to be extra strict on everybody. So yeah, it won't affect the World Cup players and officials, but it will affect people who are coming to the US to watch the World Cup from other countries, especially from, as Trump called it, third world countries. And it will also affect students coming to the US from what, as Trump called it, third world countries, because all these 75 countries are countries Trump calls third world countries. But Russia is not a third world country, but that's another conversation. My point is, we are living in uncharted times. So we can't say for sure what is going to happen in future. I just hope this rule or this freeze is removed before people start applying for the World Cup, which I'm sure people have already started, but before people get into more in the fever of the World Cup. And okay, I would subscribe to my channel. I'll keep you updated if something new come up. I'm in the library, I'm on campus, so there's an air blowing, so I'm sorry if it affects how you hear me. All right. Subscribe.